It's great to be with you. I really, really feel excited to share you with the listeners and the viewers, and especially to anyone that has not met you. You really had a profound impact on my life, and I mean, you continue to, but there was a period there which you would be well aware of when I was practicing with you as much as I could in Bali, in Sydney. And that was really profound in helping me embody flow. It really did feel like before then, my yoga practice was very out of the body. And then you so profoundly helped me have that same kind of high type of peak experience, but deeply in the body. So I'd love for us just to open up the conversation on how embodied flow came about after all these years. Where did it begin? The stages of kind of evolution, and where are you at with it right now?
Thank you. I think first of all, I mean, for all of us as facilitators, I think the backdrop question, the one that I sit with, that I marinate on, that I wrestle with daily is, what is the purpose of yoga? This thing that what is yoga, first and foremost, and is the technology that I'm using are all the access points that I'm interfacing with, taking me closer to yoga, what I believe yoga is. So as a facilitator, that is my main curiosity. How does what I'm doing lead me into a way of awakening? And I think necessarily that shifts and changes depending on what we're experiencing and what we know, truth with a capital T or knowledge with a capital K, as the tradition would transliterate it to be. So that's always been my quest, even before stepping into an asana class. And, through various modalities that if we're yogis, we will interface with through meditation and through asana and through contemplation and reading and all of these avenues, experiences start to happen and expand. And, I was certified as an Anusara teacher, which had a lot to do with who I met along the path. There's synchronicity, and there's a little bit of randomness and a little bit of attraction. It's not, I don't think most of us, when we start our yoga path, search with intelligence about where we're going. We end up with people that we like, that we resonate with, and then we end up, we get to a certain place. And Anusara for me was that it is and was an amazing system of biomechanics. And what I deeply resonated with was the anchoring in the tantric philosophy, permission to weave, and also permission to be joyful and playful inside of the yoga. But after, and I started teaching that in 2001, around 2007, I started studying more intensely with Sally Kempton and getting more into the tantric teachings of Kashmir Shaivism. And a question that I was holding is, what I'm understanding from the teachings, is my teaching of yoga, the way that I'm teaching it, is it facilitating that? And my experience, my own inquiry was that I was enmeshed in the philosophical teachings. I had a deep meditation practice, but then came asana class. And in asana class, I felt like I was giving people a lot of alignment instructions, which captivated their beta brain and gave them a lot of things to do. And we would get into and had the methodology to get into very advanced asanas. And so all of that created a something that was working passively, but not as an artist, researcher, science inquirer, none of which is officialized by any degree, but my own concept of myself.
I'll back it. I'll certify it.
I just felt like I felt like on news programs like CNN, where there's somebody talking and then there's a ticker tape and another ticker tape underneath that. I felt like I was engaging with, and people were having to what I believe the yoga teachings are for me. And that shifted when I met the world of body-mind centering. And body-mind centering created by Bonnie Bainbridge Cohen, more like a compendium of many, many, many different movement modalities. And we could summarize it by saying that her book is Sensing, Feeling, Action, so that anything that is the consciousness that is me, I could sense it, like my organs, for example. Sensing is looking at it with the nerve, utilizing the nervous system component. Feeling is when you're there, you've got it, like you're holding the key in your hand. And from the feeling point, action. And it was super disturbing. The way that I got to body mind centering was actually a student of mine who was assisting me, was doing things inside of the room that seemed to be lighting people up, but it had nothing to do with what I require with her. What are you doing? And that started me taking private sessions with her, which then led me to Bonnie. And what I realized is that I was approaching asana, I think mostly from my brain. And so my brain was telling my body what to do. My body would comply. But that was different than moving from the felt sense of an internal or a like an interoception, a felt sense of what my body as a landscape is doing in relationship to self to self, self to other, and self to environment. So as I started to study that, I started to layer it into the asana classes that I was already teaching. And I probably met you around this point, where I was starting to layer inside of the framework of Anusara some embodiment practices that I would say texturized the asana, or layered in the asana with some of the felt sense. And what that did for me was it brought alive the tantric teachings in the feeling of it. And it's going from like 2D to 3D. It felt like I went full surface into a more multidimensional terrain. And the second thing is that I saw it was bringing students into a different place that felt more like meditation and in motion, which had been really the big inquiry, is how do I get the meditative state into movement, into my life? Like, how do I help curate that experience of blurring those seams between things? And then at a certain point, it just was clear that what I was clinging on to from the Anusara framework was no longer really providing the framework that would become embodied flow, that I needed to depart from a system in order to be able to fully explore what became embodied flow. And in 2013, I met Scott Lyons, who is certified in body mind centering, as well as infant development movement education, which is another body mind centering program, as well as a psychologist. And initially I was looking for somebody to teach body mind centering inside of advanced trainings, but then what happened through our dialogue is really cultivating a technology. We're calling it a technology. I'm reluctant to call it a system because it's flexible. It can move and change as we discover, but that's bringing together a framework that could bring together all these different strands of tantric philosophy, of psychology, of movement, asana, free movement, yoga, body mind centering. And that's basically what became Embodied Flow.
Amazing.
Yeah, it's been a lot of work.
Yeah, a lot of work. How have you been finding it? Like from your vantage point for one, but how has the feedback been from students?
Yeah. Well, we're now in five years of Embodied Flow. We officially started it in 2014. And I think in the first year or two, it was more of an exploration ground to see, what is this? How's it going? And how are people interfacing with it? And what was immediately apparent is that the experience is very different than a pure, let's say, a straight asana experience. What I observe now, having had students that have come through, because we also have a somatic, so we have a 200, a 300, a somatic movement therapy program, and then other ancillary programs. But watching people come through for years, what I see as, kind of the effect of practicing in this way is that I really feel that people they become more easeful, they become more fluid, they become way more embodied in terms of knowing their body and in terms of being able to listen into their body. And also, it seems to have a much more accessible transition into the living reality, and people's living reality, because we do a lot of psychology and a lot of bridging of body mind framed in terms of the how, in terms of, the reciprocity between us and others, which is part of what informs our method. We're playing with, and it took me some time to do it, not only somatic practices, but playing with blurring the seams between asana and free movement, meditation. And what I recognize is that free movement can look like, if you just look at it from the outside, you might think that it's people kind of randomly moving around a space. But when people are orienting from different layers of the felt sense of their physical structure, they really start to gain ownership of it and remembrance of the frequencies that created us, have always been there and create us. So it's, in a way, it feels like speaking the language of the palette of the universe. And I feel like in terms of us becoming liberated and embodied, that spectrum of flavors is something that we're compelled to know, but also it's kind of our responsibility to know. Like this, we know more about how to operate our computers than most people know how to operate their body.
True.
And I don't, even though I might know from a very gross level how to force my body into, or that I can feel all the subtleties of what's happening inside of that shape. So I think when people have an authentic sense of, let's say, the marrow of their bones, it's not only a frequency that they can call on to create a unity space inside of their body, but also if you can tap into that, you can heal it in a way. So
yeah, I was just about to bring up the bone conversation, because that was profound when you really helped me connect to my bones. At first, it doesn't seem that profound, but it was. When I first started practicing with you, I was doing a lot of plant medicine in which it was really activating a lot of mystical vision and transcendental experiences and whatnot. And then coming to your classes, you were speaking all this pineal gland language and getting me into a state very similar to when I was with plant medicine, which was really profound for me and was new territory. And then you brought in the languaging and the exploration of the bones and the marrow, which I was getting just as high connecting with the bones as the pineal gland and as plant medicine, which was really, I think it's huge, just that little bit, especially now as plant medicine gets more and more popularized, which has pros and cons. But really, we all know we can get just as awakened, just as illuminated from being in the body. But
it's something that I hear a lot from people is like, wow, this feels like I'm on drugs. This feels like this feels like LSD. This feels like ayahuasca. And I find that fascinating having, even before yoga, those God experiences that I got to through, psychedelic drugs and other plant medicines, was always giving me a glimpse of the view from a different way of seeing, which is how I've regarded those medicines. Is like, they can give me a glimpse, but what is it about those experiences that are expanding my awareness, and how do I do that without anything extra?
Exactly.
And that's something that's been remarkable to discover. It's like the glands were kind of a first passion, but then finding that in, as you said, like the marrow gives me a different, like a new avenue, a new access. The cells, actually, when I dive into the felt sense of the cells, can transport me into another place. The fascia, like each thing has it. And what I start to discover is that actually when I pour my awareness into any space of my body, it leads me into this heightened sense of awareness presence, which is what I believe the Tantra tradition is calling Shiva space or Anandamaya Kosha, or all these names for these ecstatic experiences that are actually accessible from our own body. And this is what got me so dedicated to exploring this is, wow, there's infinite wormholes to the grandest felt sense of what we are, which no words can capture. But it is absolutely kind of reassuring that just my own physicality that is created out of the same stuff as stars and the universe, when I really dive into it, transports me into this wildly more expanded state of experiencing reality. And to be able to be in that expanded state if I choose to, but also be able to close windows if I need to, and come into perhaps a more earthy, grounded reality, and then to be able to have a permeability between those states. So I can choose, if I'm at the sea watching the sunrise, that I can open all the windows and experience that expanded space. If I'm running through the airport or, in the DMV, perhaps I want to close the windows, but not shut down or numb or, just, but bring it closer in, let's say. And that, as the tradition has always said, that fourth state, which, I'm really feeling like the Turiya state, the fourth state, is that thing that is infusing this, what we call the space that we know is mostly our body. And so when we create this continuous relationship with the fourth state and know that that's influencing every layer of ourselves, it becomes your constant companion.
What situations do you find? What would be your top 3 situations you find most challenging to find that flow, to embody the flow? Airports?
To embody airports. I'm becoming a lot better at airports, because it used to be airports because I spend the most time there, a lot of time in airports. So airport security is always my
challenging
number one challenge. I can't even imagine you doing it with 2 kids, like the amount of things that you have to go through. And then certain airports like Heathrow, where you have to re-examine everything, every certain thing. I find most government agencies pretty difficult to stay in flow. Especially like I'm living in Greece. So when we go into, government agencies, there feels sometimes a stagnation and I'm trying to learn, like, how do I slip into a gear of presence that allows me to be here and not try to escape here, because I think that the habit of being in places like that is that you want to go to your phone and do something else. So like, how do you be there and with there and okay with all the there that's there? Yeah. And I would say also family reunions. That's like, which can sometimes be a great flow. And then they can also, is it Ram Dass?
Yeah, I think you're enlightened. Go hang with your parents.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Ram Dass says that. But I definitely know I'm not when I go enlightened for like 2 minutes and then really not. Yeah.
What about for me, even though I've got a fluoro light in my face right now, like places with a lot of fluoro light just fucking zaps my energy. I find that really tough as well, which is airports as well. But like, I can't imagine working in a place full of fluoro lights, Wi-Fi, Bluetooth, no light. Like that would be really challenging, and how,
it would be really,
like, speaking to someone in that position, they're working in a high-rise building, bright lights, not much natural light or air, not much grounding opportunities, just 5G, Wi-Fi, just all of what we love deeply. How would you point one in that position into more of a flowing state? What would be a good practice? Like in the moment, holy shit, worked 6 hours already today. I'm just fucked. I just want coffee. I just want whatever to get through the day. How can one penetrate that intensity to get into a deeper flow? What do you think?
Well, I think one is finding an access point in your own body. So, you can start with what's available to you. It could be, for some people, maybe their heart is a place that they're able to tune into and feel and presence themselves to. Or, it could be their feet, and finding the felt sense of it. But I think a little moment, like if you can choreograph, like what I do, for example, in airports is I find we talk about anchor points in our body, which is a place that I can tap into, resonate with, and bring myself into the natural felt sense of what is me. So even if you bring your hands to your hands, but you really pour yourself into the feeling of that, it can ripple, because it's a connected network, through the whole of your body. that kind of, even if eyes open or eyes closed, if there's that sense of the shimmering illumination when you acknowledge yourself, and in the same way that when we look in the eyes of a baby and the baby sees us and we smile, there's something about the felt sense of consciousness that when we see it, it kind of scintillates in its awareness. And I think from a moment of attunement into an anchor of your body, and then opening your eyes and seeing that you're perceiving from that place. For me, it energizes me instantly. It resets, so it's like a reset. And I could do that once an hour or once every 2 hours, and then let myself go from that place. But that there's a ground anchored inside of us, which is already bringing the natural, we are the natural world. So, we're using ourselves as nature to access a bigger energy. And it can start very small, but those are practices I would encourage people to practice outside of work, so that it can come with them into these moments. And then, from that place, I can then go in and work, but that I also allow myself a minute, 3 minutes, 5 minutes of a reset to move from that place. I think if you're in an environment like that, that's a really simple thing that you can do. And then start to also choreograph the caregiving or the nurturing that you can do in order to, to go outside, even if it's for a few minutes, and feel the sun on your skin, to, give yourself movement breaks, even if it's getting up. I think that we have a real tendency in Western culture, in cultures, to think like, if I sit down at this chair for 8 hours and pump something out, like that's a really good thing. And if you're in flow with your work and you do that, I don't see anything wrong if you're in flow. But I think that there's probably more, I think there's probably greater output if you choreograph those kinds of breaks inside of the modern urbanized work environment.
Yeah, I love to experiment with, not that I've been in corporate environments for much time at all, but I love to experiment being in those situations where I don't feel at ease and in harmony, and creating that kind of link, that mind-heart, the body awareness link, in which it really does feel like it builds up a kind of force field, so to speak. It does feel like it literally sparks this higher electromagnetic frequency that's very robust, very protective without needing to put on a guard. It's like we have this very high frequency, this high vitality, but we got to it's like we got to log on. We got to tune into it, unless we have, how would you put that?
Well, I just, one of the things I'm also considering a lot is adaptability. It's not that
true.
I only access yogic states when I'm in nature, drinking, coconut water and eating really pure prana-filled foods. Like, that's amazing when I can be in those spaces. But the reality is, we live in a very modernized world with a lot of challenging, fast-paced, complicated energetic realms to navigate. And so what I'm finding is resourcing myself. That is the thing that travels with me, to find as many strategies, to find inside of me ways to come back into the felt sense of well-being, using repeatable access points inside. And it's the same thing that mantra is intended to do. And this is, let's say, like mantra, finding inside of ourselves those those repeatable access points. I mean, to me, this is the tantrikas were always interested in how does this body become the doorway to the felt sense of infinity inside of me. And that sounds so huge. Nobody likes to say it out loud, in conversation, but that's what's happening. That's what the fourth state is that we're accessing the eternal abiding, nameless, absolutely vast, huge, ungraspable thing inside of our own body. And the Magna and the everydayness of that is so compelling. And I think at a certain point, when you've been on this journey for a while, what is more confusing is why we don't access that. Like, how is it possible that we're not actually accessing that? And we've created lifestyles and, civilizations, organizations where people habitually do not access that in the name of work or productivity. Really? Yeah. You want to know what I really?
Yeah, I want to know what you really think.
I think we've forgotten how, based on the creation of civilization, and I think that it's been a long process of people falling under control of other governments or religions that have stripped away our remembrance of how to access it. There's been really, I think, what Tantra really does do is and possibly all paths of spirituality at a certain point, is that you're wildly independent and free, which makes you uncontrollable. It makes you a wild card in terms of what you might do next. It makes you absolutely can't profit from that. You can't really, you can't contain it. So if the civilization that we're walking around in is one where, we've tried to subjugate nature and and money is the currency, is, the biggest agreed upon belief. It's very challenging. Like, there's nobody profits from people waking up. It's just not a profitable model. So I think somewhere in our own evolution, that when the interest became not people thriving and awakening, but rather people becoming in service to a very few people, and we all agreed to that paradigm, I think that started us being kept children.
Yeah.
Thank
you for sharing.
Yeah. And I think, I think if you read Sapiens, Yuval Harari's book, he does a lot to explain that. And I think part of waking up is seeing that all the paradigms are made up. So what is it that you really wish to do and live and be in this world? And, just to bring it back to yoga, that's something that I think people really forget, because they say, oh, but, people will say to me, if I have a class that's mostly free movement and not a lot of asana, this is not yoga.
Really?
Which I really want to say to them, what is your understanding of yoga? That it is asana? Because to me, that is like to me, that's like saying Facebook is news. Like, it's about the same as that. Like, it's one portal that people have utilized to share information in a certain way, but it's clearly not the depths of the meaning of any of it. So the question I always hold is, like, does that asana is great in terms of it's going to make your body stronger and healthy. It's hopefully going to help your mind concentrate in a certain, like, a singular place with breath and energetics. I do believe in the energetics of some of the postures, but at a certain point, it's a beautiful check-in zone. Right? It will strengthen my body to be able to do lots of things, but it really starts to become the inquiry to me is like, is it freeing you or is it keeping you stuck? And that's the thing I really challenge everyone to look at. Like, something might free you for a certain point in time. For 10 years, absolutely obsessed with asana, obsessed with the bigger, the more, how do I get there? How do I do that? But then at another point in the evolution, it's not enough. It's beyond that. And then it would be a weird stagnation, I think, for me as a practitioner or facilitator to stop there. It would be like as a musician to only play the same song for the rest of my life, which would be such a wildly sad thing to do.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I of course, come into that conversation as well. And I remember that feeling in myself as well. I remember a kind of almost like a no man's land, a kind of dark soul period in which I no longer was so enthralled by asana, but I could feel a kind of attachment to it because I remember the kind of good old days of how good and like kind of innocent and, well, just kind of one-dimensional and just naive it felt. And I remember a really interesting period of mourning of like, fuck, like that was just so like simple, for lack of a better word. And then there was that middle ground, that no man's land is coming to me of like, I got one foot in the kind of more mystical depths of what yoga can bring, but one foot like really attached to what the asana practice was. So I do think it's an interesting period for a lot of modern yogis that have been brought into the yoga world and it's been just vinyasa or just power yoga or just ashtanga or something like that. And then maybe even organically, they've had some deeper mystical experiences. I've seen quite often, and I remember that feeling myself of like, fuck, like, what next? Like if someone doesn't have a teacher such as yourself that can then go, well, here's what's next, you know?
I think, yeah. And I think there's, just by numbers of who's in the yoga world, it's exponential. We have so many. I don't think there's ever been this many practitioners. So once people start to hit this threshold at like 7 years to 10 years of practice, now you have all these people who are reaching the threshold at the same time with not as many teachers who've gone before who have that duration of practice.
Right.
And because they didn't necessarily have teachers in front of them, we don't have those clear answers about what happens next as accessible to us. But to me, there's the money. Like that's the arena that we should be focusing on more than about the first 5 to 10 years. Like that's easy. But then what happens is nobody says what happens next, because what I see people do is either they cycle out to something else, which is totally fine, because let's say now you have the teachings of yoga. So what do you want to do with it? Where do you want to take it? And in some ways it could be, well, follow your inner prompting. If you want to go to be a psychologist now or a life coach or, some of the various avenues that people then explore as the something next, or
be a cycle instructor.
It can be. And yeah, I mean, so you see some people take a horizontal step, which is to something else, which is fine. And I think it's right at the point where we hit this threshold of, like you're saying, that it feels like stagnation. It feels like a plateau. It feels like I'm not excited by the things that I was excited by. And that's the point to stay. not necessarily does it mean in the same practice, but I would say in some practice that can serve as a transition point into the next thing.
Mm-hmm.
And it, and also to kind of, I really feel like to lean into the plateaus to see where the information is coming. Because if you spend all these years vetting the instrument of your body to be a receiver perceiver, that is, you know, as I'm finally understanding, it's like we're an input output device that we've been constantly tuning, clarifying. That's what yoga really wishes for us. So right at the point where we become the clearest conduit of input output, that's really when we should keep going, because that's when we're useful to the universal body. Like we've done work to clarify, to clear, and to have that kind of meditative state informing our operational system. And from there, what is it that you want? That's the Icha Shakti. That's the desire. Where does it want to go? And I actually, you know, it may not be yoga, but it is yoked to the, you know, it may not be, let's say, asana, but it's yoked to the bigger field in a guiding way. So I think that's kind of the what's next. And
leaning into the plateau. I like that. Of us,
yes, because we know that there's going to be a moment of concealment. There's going to always be a moment of stagnation. And having gone through enough of them in, you know, the 20 something plus years of practice, like, when that stagnation, just like in any developmental process with the kid that you can see, is going to be the thing that catapults you into the next discovery.
Yeah. And most of us have just been socialized that it's always got to be steps forward, always a linear kind of upward progression. But that one step backwards every now and then, that thick plateau is completely natural.
Completely. Like if you think of a spot, it's like there's this upward thrust, and then there's a little downslope, and then an upward thrust and a little downslope. It's always happening. I mean, I see it in myself. I see it in the thousands of students who've come through. There's this expansion and then a contraction, which is normal after every expansion. And what becomes a little more frustrating are the plateaus, which is like, it doesn't feel necessarily like expansion or contraction. But that is, you know, you talked about madhya, because we didn't know if our connection would be so good with
We've
the
had
internet.
a few madhyas, but it's working.
Like, you know, this gap, the plateau is a kind of still point that where you could know that your body mind is harmonizing, catching up to itself. So there's not overstimulation, there's not underproduction. It's just and it can't possibly stay there, because nothing does in nature. It just doesn't. It like may feel like a fallow period, but it's a regenerative period. And it's sticking through that and then starting to see when naturally the natural oscillation. And this is back to listening to the body, because if I do it from only a mental place, like that's where people rush in to fix it from a mental place, which won't change the situation. So that's when they go, okay, yoga's not working, I should do something else. And that might create a temporary reprieve, but there's another thing, which is, what if I lean into this, which can mean some different things. Like it might even mean taking a break, but it doesn't mean throw it all out, in my opinion. It just means like what is coming up in the gestation period. I mean, it's occurred to me actually pretty recently, because I went through a period like this into the next breakthrough, that, you know, we use this image of the butterfly a lot in the spiritual traditions, and, you know, that image of them going into their cocoon and dissolving their own body in order to come out as something else. Like, that's what it can feel like. It's like this period of, okay, I lived this caterpillar life. Now there's a period of dissolution before the next evolution. And in a yogi's life, that's going to happen hundreds of times if you're really doing the work. And it's kind of finding that, what is the continuity between those stagnations, evolutions, which may not be always as flashy as they were at the beginning. Right? It's the beginning, everything's, kind of dissonant, and then you're getting an order. So it's so palpable, the love affair, when you fall in, and it just changes over time.
Let's speak a bit more about the madhya, because you and Sally Kempton really were the first two to pop that cherry in my life of the madhya experience. And I really thank you, because it's so profound in not just having an easier, direct portal into who we truly are, beyond thought, beyond body, beyond time and space, but it's also so integrative. I mean, it continues to this day of just looking for the gap, looking for the madhya in everyday situations, and it's so helpful. So I think that's an added tool in those kind of sticky situations, is like not fully believing the next thought and kind of not pushing it away, not grabbing onto it, but sliding into the gap, I think, is also very practical in those sticky plateau situations. Could you, for people that don't know anything about the madhya, could you speak about what it is and how it can also be like practical on the mat and then like beyond?
Yeah. Well, Sally Kempton introduced me to the concept of madhya, and it's a big tantric concept. I know that it's referenced in the Vijnana Bhairava, the wisdom teachings of Shiva, or the fierce form of Shiva, which is the conversation between formlessness and form. And in the first sutra, when form or Shakti is asking Shiva, how should I know this universe? And he's listing ways and practices wherein one could know this. And the first practice is to follow the breath to the end point from which the exhale arises. And that end point to, where the inhale goes to and from which the exhale comes. So that gap is the madhya. And the first time I practiced that in meditation, just following the breath, and Sally was facilitating not to exaggerate that gap, not to exaggerate that space, but to simply fall into the space. And I found it very, very, very difficult. But I was around senior meditators who described their dive into this space between as, into infinity, into the void, into the causal. And I was, as a younger practitioner, so confused. I was like, I just think I'm holding my breath. But she also expanded the meaning of that where is it that this endless gift that stitches us into the everything from an in-breath and an out-breath, and that in between those two, there's a space, and that space, which is also the space between thoughts, which is also the 99.9% space that is everywhere. In fact, so much more space or madhya than actual substance. And we spend so much time seeing the substance, seeing the 0.01%, clinging to it, concretizing it, trying to work with it. And I think what the tradition keeps telling us is hiding in plain sight is the space between all of that substance. And that space, wherever you find it, in all of these places, some places more obvious than others, like between in-breath and out-breath. Also accessible every minute of your life, every minute of the day. Each, like, widen the gap is what the tradition says. Like, madhya vikasak chitananda labaha. When you widen the space of the madhya, you fall into the felt sense of the bliss of being, which is what the Tantra tradition describes as the essence of this nothingness, everythingness, formlessness that is encoding everything. And so there's other teachings that come up about the madhya, because it's sometimes defined as the middle. We said the gap. I mean, I think Ramana Maharshi talks about the, in cinema, how there's the frames in old film, right? The frames, and then there's the seams between the frames that we don't perceive in a moving picture, which is also that type of madhya. And so it's kind of learning to flip our perceiving, that as much as we may cling to those things that feel so substantive, there's actually something that's much more than the substance we can perceive. And that's what we're calling the madhya. So it's finding little spaces in between breath, in between thoughts. There's gap times, the tradition would say, in the day, like when between nighttime and the rising of the sun, and between the setting of the sun. Those little spaces where the veil between formlessness, form perhaps feels less. But I also think of, when we talked about pulsation, to me, a stagnation, to bring it back to what we were saying before, is a bit of a gap between our own, like, we're constantly in this expansion contraction, which is, like us birthing ourselves to ourselves all the time. And the stagnation can be, if we really pour ourselves into that, like a nap time or a resting period wherein we restore for the next expansion. So I'm really learning that in those times I can let myself fall into that gap, or fall into what feels like non-doing or non-action, because it cannot infinite possibilities is where the potentialities arise.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's not passive, is it? It's not submissive, it's not passive, it doesn't lack intelligence. If anything, it feels like it has more vitality, a more kind of thriving, broad intelligence. Because I think that is a common fear. If we've been socialized into just believing every single thought and thinking that just knowledge, kind of, you could say small mind knowledge is power and so forth, all of that heavy doctrine that most of us have had pretty thickly intertwined into our lives, I know I did, to become easeful and trusting of that gap, that not knowing, or not knowing into all knowing. Like it even that seems to require some consistency and training. Would you agree?
Yeah, so I think the biggest consistency is to learn to trust the space. That's like basically that's what all of the teachings are teaching.
Yeah.
I think, this I don't know where it comes from, but the parable of the teacher and the student, wherein the student keeps coming to the teacher with all of this knowledge, and he says, I think it might be a father and a son. And he says, but let me know when you know that by which knowing every other thing can be known. And that's the thing. Like, there's something before all the learned intelligence. That is the thing the traditions are begging us to pay attention to, and not the projections, but that which is informing the projections. And that's the thing that I think I can perceive with people a long time on the path seems to make the biggest difference, is recognizing that all the output, actions, thoughts, interactions, anything that we manifest is coming from, we could call it this madhya or Shiva space or Turiya state, however you want to name it. It's finding how to spend and marinate more time in that space, and from that place pull forth, pull out. That's the fertile ground. And I think once one knows that, however you get there is the thing. Like, that's the technology. So, just to say about embodied flow, that's really our interest in going, okay, what are the things that facilitate us moving in that space? And from that space, how move, how speak, how act, how engage with Earth Matrix. Because that's our reality, as far as I know, is Earth Matrix. So I can't experience other planets and galaxies and dimensions, but come teach me how, and I'm in.
So the kind of you could say the typical yoga class out there is on a quicker pace, often with music. That seems to be what is commonly perceived to be a yoga class. It seems to be the main perception, a quicker kind of flowing vinyasa, often with music. Can you find the gap in that?
Well, look, I'm using days. I have no problem with that. I actually have, what I'm finding is much more tolerance for all strategies. I think the difference...
I'm not judging.
No, I know. I think the difference always is, where is the facilitator coming from, and what is their intention? Right. So if their intention is just to get people to move and have a good time, that's, I think a lot of people really just want that. And thankfully, I can look back and say the tradition knew about that. That's why, let's say in the sutras, there's practices that, like, put on music and move around, and it's going to get you into a better mood than if you didn't. Right. I mean, I get a lot, because I can get, So I kind of am of the mindset that there's many, many, many different modalities. The thing that I think I get frustrated with is corporate studios, teachers, they need to do for profit about something else, right?
Say that again, actually. It got all matrixy, madhya-y during that. I missed that little sentence. Corporate. It cut off at corporate.
Corporate organizations telling teachers what they must do in order to make more profit. Because that is the thing, that is the problem place. Like, that's the problem that came in to try to solve a bit in the first place. Being intermediary in the way between you accessing something ultimate. So the challenge for yours is, because I think a lot of us are required to work in places like that. So how do those guys what they want and be a secret ninja been a little bit of you think they need? I think that job is super hard if that's your interest as a facilitator, like how to work inside of the gyms, the more hour class, like the forced time limitations, and people who have expectations about what yoga is, that includes a lot of sweat and a lot of moving. And it's an interesting strategy. I think it's possible ultimately in instance to find space and gap. Like I think, if I can go to a class like that and still find the things that are important to me, then I will be very successful in terms of my own
practice in
adaptability.
Mm-hmm.
But it's really, it's that. And that may be a very great way, really. And maybe some people, that's the extent of what they will understand. I mean, I think what bothers me is when I hear teachers saying, yes, but this is what people want.
Right.
And I just think I can give them what they want so I can need.
Mm-hmm.
But I think if somebody doesn't finally get to the point about how am I serving the bigger teachings of yoga, then why call it yoga? Like, just call it something else. That's really it.
I agree with that.
Yeah.
Yeah. And an observation is that people's nervous systems are so fucking overloaded right now. And it seems to be this kind of fire upon fire, almost this kind of addicted to that rajasic overload. And yes, we can burn up excess tension and so forth and really get a beautiful release. But I see a lot of more of an addicted to the high, addicted to distraction, addicted to the noise, and just kind of exacerbating that. That's an observation I'm seeing.
No, I mean, for sure, there's a tone that is set, a frequency that used to, analogy today, it's like if we're a fish raised in the Atlantic, we're used to, a harder life, more turbulence, more cold, raised in a fish tank. So we definitely get to see that we may not realize doesn't actually synchronize with our own signature vibration, which we all have different current vibration. Like vibration is different than rabbit vibration, but we may be a slow signature, a slow vibration that has learned to operate at a very quick frequency. And those things actually being out of sync will start to create a tremendous amount of anxiety, right? In the same way that when you see somebody from a big city come into a very rural area and they're still kind of operating at city frequency, and it takes time to adapt. So,
adaptability.
I think that adaptability, but also recognition. It's starting to it definitely demands time and space to be able to learn to remember to listen to your authentic self, because there's so many distortions in play. There's the distortions of our family of origin. There's of the style, and then how we as a child have integrated cues into our inner landscape. So, one of the big things of yoga, the self, this individual self as a microcosm of the universal self. And that means I have to really excavate all the things that I've signed up for that I'm now calling me. And that is a complicated task to dismantle the things that I have held myself to be as me, including the thoughts and the beliefs and the way I map my body, the way I understand what is mine, what is mine, something that I've put on as mine that's actually not mine. When we say get to the true self or get to the full state or get to the madhya, all of that is ways of saying, how do I find the behind, or, you know, as the Buddhist tradition likes to say, your original face. And that's, you know, the thing that I, you know, just back to the creation of embodied flow, I think that's something that I found when I just authentically tapped into the resonance of any of the foundations of what is me. Because even asana is already taking what I've taken myself to be, let's say my confused muscles or my misunderstanding of like absolute no contact of my organs, keeping them into different shapes. So the kind of gross architectural shape, but doesn't necessarily, and that will give me a certain ability for movement and proprioception and body vocabulary and stamina and all of those. But it doesn't necessarily, although it doesn't necessarily let tune all of the stations of my body, which are the doorways to the infinite, in my feeling of it anyways.
Beautiful. I wanted to bring attention to like the balance of, we could say, balancing waking up with growing up. How are you finding that, of the true yoga of bringing together the transcendental with the embodied state of that? I mean, I know that's what embodied flow, a big part of it is about that. How are you finding that in yourself and in your students? I mean, you'd be well aware of it as well. Most kind of wisdom traditions have been gravitating towards just the transcendental, mystical, outer body, true nature experience, like a big mind. How are you finding this kind of, could be regarded kind of new territory of really embodying it and not just bypassing all the human shit and our sexuality and the sensory experience, and in order to just rest in the madhya or rest in nothingness? How are you finding the true integration of that, this kind of next movement?
I think the way I understand, it's fascinating because I guess I categorize it is that people, different flavors, there's awakening that's happening. Who wrote this book, Wake Up Now, talks about an awakening as an experience you did not previously experience. So in the simplest kind of awakening, like an aha, when I feel into my bones, that's a thing that was sleeping inside of me. I mean, it was there, but I didn't have an experience of it. So that's an awakening to that. When I keep calling those kinds of little ahas and like, oh, that's my cells, that's my fascia, and I really feel it, it starts a felt sense to, okay, this is always obviously from my perception, but it starts a felt sense of embodied awakening, let's say, which the challenge with Steve Bodium say this, that there's another kind of awakening, which I think is inevitable in almost anybody in the practice, which is the falling away, the stripping away of all the things, false self. And that place feels like it is the felt sense of the nothing, everything, the everything, nothing. As I understand it, an experience is kind of a halfway up the mountain experience. To integrate that experience into my embodied perspective is really what I'm now understanding is what embodied flow is about. It's like I can have stripped away self, which is an uncomfortable place to be in, and also not entirely useful in terms of interacting in Earth School world right? In this dimensional realm, which is what Tantra is interested, because Tantra doesn't care about just that non-dual. It's how do I do that? Let it all is in the material of me and in the world, which as I understand it is the full journey. So I think we're working on these little articulated moments of awakening parts of ourselves sometimes, and this is happening now in the training, so that can lead to the big falling away of self. And then what I feel good about is that the integration of that reality or way of being into the portals back into this world. So it's two ways, right? The body is the doorway into the infinite madhya. Madhya is then also can be brought into the body through the embodiment practice. And what I've observed over time, because I think that whole process takes years, depending on the student, how long it takes to integrate and to hold that space depends on the student. For this, I think that embodied flow over years is a technology I'm super excited about. Like this is what I feel really good about. That, you know, I think as an ongoing practice, it's like we're playing between formlessness, form, and discovering increasingly how to integrate that experience into our walking around moving reality. And it's in the foreground of what we're doing.
Yeah, it's super exciting, Tara. I love... Keep going. We're matrixing again. We're warping.
It's in there in all the yoga practices. This exists somewhere. I mean, in somebody's idea of it, it's there. It's just whether people who are now facilitating it know that. And I'm really hopeful that all of the conversation and communication between yogis on all the layers is leading to that, because I think it's the only place it goes. Just really allowing ourselves to be with the wild variety of what's out there, and also different for it. But I have such a faith in the process. I mean, in the whole, whatever you want to call yoga, philosophy, movement, freaking, I don't know, like it's too big any category. But in the big lineage of yoga, I have so much faith in its own stored merit that I feel like all the iterations carry some of it.
Yeah. Tara, what's coming up next? What's on the schedule for the rest of the year?
For me, for the rest of the year. So now I'm in Paros, Greece, I have a 200 in September. I have a tour of Australia. This will be my 9th year going to, I'll be in Sydney, Melbourne, and then 300 in Bali again in January. I have also an exciting created an embodied consciousness immersion, which is in Berkeley in October. And we have other teachers that are really like Sally Kempton, Judith Stone, who is another teacher, station psychologist, who has something called patient, as well as other somatic movement, Ray Johnson and Teresa Silo and Dr. Michael Beckwith. So creating this spectrum of teachers around the conversation of movement and awakening psychology, trying to get more interaction in these different disciplines, body, mind centering, and world and the spirit world all together. Bonnie Bainbridge will also be at that conference. So we wanted to bring all of
amazing.
our teachers, and yeah, it's going to be amazing. Yeah, and then us of embodied flow, us figuring out we want to get more things online, and we want to cultivate ways to get this information to more people. That's really what's coming up for us.
Yeah, it's beautiful what you're doing, Tara. It's super sophisticated. And I just really want to point out how much I appreciate your wisdom and your knowledge merging with like just such a beautiful humility and humor and joy. It's just it's so refreshing and beautiful. And I love that you're leading the way with that beautiful, playful balance. You know, it's just such a joy to witness.
Thank you, Stu. I mean, yeah. You're such a soul brother.
Yeah. It's so good to connect. I really hope we can connect in person sooner than later.
Yes, I'll have to find a way to see you in Australia.
I know. We're always in like the US when you're here and somewhere else when you're here, but it'll happen. But thank you so much for your time. Enjoy Greece, and until next time, much love, Tara.
Much love.
Yeah. Mwah. Bye-bye.